Guys, it's October. You know what that means?
It's spooky month, baby! Woo!
Ever since The Legend of Zelda first debuted back in '98, boss battles have been an integral part to the Zelda formula. A final obstacle to test all the skills you've learned throughout the previous levels. The one roadblock that is stopping you from progressing your goal. The Zelda series has multiple types of boss battles, some of which are amazing challenges for the player, and some insult the player for even booting up the game in the first place. But some of these bosses leave an impact. One that shocks you to your core and keeps you up at night, for if you close your eyes, it'll be all that you see. Bosses that make you question the E for Everyone rating on Ocarina of Time. To start off this spooky season, I want to talk about some of my favorite scary Zelda bosses. I'm going to give a general rundown of the fight and explain why I like it so much. I'm not going to be rating these bosses based on how scary I think they are aesthetically. Otherwise, I just make the same list of 5 bosses that everyone else comes up with. Instead, I'll rank them on how well they invoke fear in me personally. So whether that fear comes from aesthetics or narrative build-up, if it's scary, it'll be on this list. Now, you may be asking me, Majora, why are you starting off October with a ranking video? Well, my dear sweet viewer, there is nothing scarier in this world than another person's opinion, and this list is entirely my opinion, it's not a fact. Now, I think I talked your ear off long enough, so without further ado, here's my list of the top 10 scariest Zelda bosses. Dust falls from the door as you make your way to the central chamber. It's clear that no one has been in there for years. Heck, the Arbiter's ground as a whole has been empty for so long that the dead had enough time to rise before a person has returned. It feels almost lonely. The Mirror of Twilight is nowhere to be found. The only thing in the room is a massive skeleton of some beast or monster that has long been dead. As you start to contemplate the sheer size of the thing, you hear it. A laugh. You know that laugh. And unfortunately, you know who that laugh belongs to. Zant appears, striking his sword into the skull of the skeleton. The entire room starts to shake. Its eyes glow as you watch in horror as it reanimates. This is how we are introduced to the Twilight fossil Stallard. Stallard is fought entirely using the spinner, an item found earlier in the dungeon and is criminally underused throughout the game. The first phase involves Link circling around the boss, and then propelling himself to hit the spine of Stallard, causing it to crack and shatter. The challenge of this phase is hitting Stallard with enough momentum to crack it without one of the hundreds of reanimated soldiers blocking your path. Seriously, these guys are annoying, but we'll talk about them later. Phase 1 will continue until Link manages to whittle down the spine to the Stallard's torso, causing it to fall over. Phase 2 starts with a central platform for Link to spin on being revealed under the mountains of sand. Stallard's head will detach itself from its body, levitating on its own. The goal of this phase is to scale the walls using your spinner, and then leaping over to the other wall, striking the Stallard's head in the process. Once you've caused enough damage, the boss is over. Now for me, personally, the fear of this battle comes from the first phase of the fight. I was initially expecting the fight to be with some sort of Twily, maybe Zant or Midna. So when I saw Stallard slowly start to reanimate, a sense of dread started to settle in, and I thought to myself, oh sweet Hylia and all that is holy, how on earth am I supposed to beat that thing? Seriously, this thing is incredibly intimidating. Even more than Morpheal in my opinion. Even after death, it still attempts to drag Hylians down into the grave. Not to mention the fight is incredibly difficult. The objectives seem simple enough, ram into the guy's spine, but this is made difficult by the stealth troops that will pop out of nowhere and change your momentum. Seriously, what the heck, guys? They show up so much that it feels more like luck when you actually manage to hit the darn thing, making it feel like you're just playing a game of cat and mouse and Stallard's just making fun of you. But the real horror of this fight didn't occur to me until I moved on to the second phase. My mind started to wander to the stealth troops, and I couldn't help but think about how they died. There were several cells in the Arbiter's grounds that would have held them fine. There was no need to put them in a chamber that was clearly designed to hold incredibly large prisoners. I first thought that the stealth troops were the remains of the Gerudo tribe, as they were noticeably absent from their famous desert. Like they were thrown into this chamber with the sword and a shield as a form of execution, a fight to the death. But then I wondered if this was the remains of the soldiers who were trying to contain the beasts in the first place. No matter what happened to bring them all there, the possibilities sent shivers down my spine. And that is why Salad has earned the number 10 spot on this list. You make your way into a dimly lit room which is seemingly empty. That's strange. With the amount of traps that was set outside to stop people from getting to this door, one would assume it was holding something of value. Had someone already been here? You start to consider it, when one of the lights flickers ahead of you, and you hear scurrying up above the walls. That's when you see it, a giant spider covered in twily armor. It locks eyes with you. This is Armagoma, the twily arachnid. Despite what I said earlier in the video, the main horror of this fight is admittedly Armagoma's design. I mean, just look at the thing. I don't know why the enemy designers decided to mess with the audience, but there is something genuinely wrong with spider enemies in this game, especially Armagoma. Everything from the sounds it makes while walking, to the way it walks, to the way its legs curl up when it gets crushed, to the sounds it makes while it gets in pain, to the little hairs on its body. Why, guys? What? They all make me feel out of place and gross in a way. Maybe it's just because I don't like spiders, but this fight genuinely creeps me out. Unfortunately, that's the only part of the fight that creeps me out. The first phase involves shooting Armagoma to the ground and controlling the statues with a Dominion Rod to crush them with their hammers. This is fun enough, but once the second phase has started, this is the point where not only Link stops taking the fight seriously, but the game itself stops taking the fight seriously, both in its design, fight, and music. This is the music it plays during the second phase of the fight. It feels weird to have such a potential threat of an enemy have all its potential wasted on a joke that isn't even that funny. It's just sad. But one good thing I will say about this fight is that it's intentionally reminiscent of the Goma fight from Ocarina of Time. Making the decision to go into the Deku Tree and kill this thing is what led the Hero of Time down a road that eventually led to his death. So to see the Hero of Twilight fight a boss that is so similar gives me a sense of accomplishment. And it's the perfect boss for a dungeon that is the Temple of Time. But one last thing I have to say about this fight, just hear me out. Look at this, and then look at this. You walk into the large room. You're used to rooms like this. You've been in ones like this several times. Whatever you're supposed to fight in here, it's standing in your way of reaching the top of the tower. The room lights up and you hear a voice.
You have done well to find your way to this place. O chosen one, accept this final challenge.
The room glows and two mechanical hands emerge from the wall, followed by a colossal face. This is your final challenge. This is Godan. Godan is fought using the bow and bombs. The player will use the bow to shoot out all of Godan's eyes. First the ones on his hands and then the ones on his face. This causes Godan to briefly power down, giving the player enough time to throw a bomb into Godan's open mouth, destroying it from the inside. Again, the main reason why this guy scares me is the design. For some reason, robotic enemies scare me a lot more than common enemies. Despite the fact that I know they're all just lines of code, a robotic enemy could have dozens of people working on its code to make it as strong as possible in universe. And unlike living creatures, machines don't get fatigued. They don't need to eat. They don't need to sleep. Mechanical enemies can win just out of the test of endurance. The other reason why this fight is terrifying is because of what's at stake. Getting to the top of this tower determines the land's future. If Link fails, control of the sea and the Triforce is Ganon's for the taking, and Hyrule will rise above the sea. And last time he had control of the kingdom, nothing good came out of it. And all these reasons and more is why Godan makes number 8 of this list. You walk into a room that's seemingly empty. The puzzles and challenges of this dungeon has been a blur as your mind focuses on the carvings from the Southern Shrine. It had to be a lie, right? There's no way it could be true. Before you even realize that the ground shakes below your feet and a face emerges from it. There's a heavy silence before it smiles and speaks.
Hey dummy, need a hint? My weak point is... Whoops. There I go, talking too much again.
This is how we meet the Nightmare Facade. If you know me in real life and you've gotten me to ramble about video games, then you already know Link's Awakening is one of my all-time favorite games, second to A Link to the Past. and that's mainly due to the story of the game. The facade is strongly connected to said story. Spoilers for Link's Awakening up ahead. Skip to number 6 if you don't want the entire plot ruined. For those who don't know, we learned that Koholint Island and all of its residents are part of the Windfish's dream during the Southern Shrine. And the current dungeon, the Face Shrine, is the one that follows immediately afterwards. Now, believe it or not, I didn't initially guess that the world was all a dream. I hadn't played very many Zelda games beforehand, so I just chalked up all the weird stuff to being Nintendo logic. But the second we learned the truth, a sense of dread filled me. This entire fight doesn't feel like a soulless battle like the previous ones, because it doesn't feel like you're just killing another nightmare. It feels like you're killing all your friends you made along the way, despite the fact that there are still 2 more dungeons left in this game. I remember secretly hoping that the owl was right and that it was all a lie, only for the boss to straight up tell me that if I continue the game, they're all going to die. The thought of killing these characters I've come to adore, Mambo, Frederick, Grandpa, and Marin, that was absolutely horrifying. It always shocks me just how good this game is at getting guilt out of the player for what is a mandatory action. So yeah, Assad isn't some Lovecraftian monster from your darkest nightmares, but for the fear it invokes for the story and the well-being of the island, it more than earns its spot as number 7 on this list. You enter the room, only to hear the door slam behind you. A quick glance behind you confirms your suspicions. Locked. You'll probably have to complete some sort of puzzle to get it open again. You make note of your surroundings. There's no switches or puzzle boxes, but there are these 4 weird things protruding from the ground. You're almost compelled to call them hands, but their arms are much longer than they should be, and they're not moving like actual arms would. You walk over to inspect it when it snaps, grabbing your head and holding you in place. While you struggle to break free, you see it emerge from the ground, and you go stiff with fear. Dead Hand. Is it cheating to include Dead Hand on this list? I mean, technically Dead Hand is a mini-boss. I mean, I probably am breaking a few rules, including him here, but I might as well, since I probably also broke rules by including Godan and Facade. Besides, the bottom of the well doesn't even have a proper mass bottle anyways. Let's be real. Everyone was scared of Dead Hand at one point. I mean, just look at him. He's going to kill you. There are several things that makes this fight terrifying. For one, the imagery of this freak of nature looming over a small child that is being restrained so it can't physically run or fight while it bites the child's face off is already disturbing enough. It makes people uneasy, I don't care who you are. The only way to fight this thing as Child Link is to let one of its arms grab you and then stabbing it in the face. Letting the hand grab you removes the player's mobility and agency. It leaves you completely vulnerable to Dead Hand as it moves towards you, head tilted back and arms outstretched to the sides. You heard of fight or flight? Yeah, you can't do either of those in this moment. Overall, the fight just leaves a bad taste in your mouth, and for kids who played this game when it first released, I'm sure it probably caused you several nightmares.
Also, I find it funny how they changed the design of Dead Hand in the remake. Before, the guy was like covered in blood all over its hands and body, and the room was filled with so many bones stacked on top of each other, like the catacombs of Paris or something. But in the remake, it's like, oh no guys, don't worry, there's no blood, it just has pink hands. And yeah, there are a few bones, but only if you look closely. We can all ignore the fact that the bottom of the well and the Shadow Temple are both torture chambers, right?
A for everyone.
But yeah, Dead Hand's creepy, so it's number 6.
You walk up a narrow path to a large room with several copies of the same painting. A dark road leading to the castle. The room clearly has some importance to the royal family, but there's no use for you being there. But as you make your way to exit, metal bars slide up from the floor, blocking your path, because there's absolutely no way you can just hop over that rope over there. You turn around to see what triggered this locked room, and that's when you see him, Ganondorf. You had seen him just not too long ago, and judging how well that fight went down, you're probably not in the best state to fight him. But this room only has one entrance, so how did he get in without you noticing? Your question is soon answered as the figure removes its mask, revealing its true form. This is the evil spirit from beyond, Phantom Ganon. Similarly to Facade, the main reason this fight fight scares me is from the setup of the story so far. Ganondorf has just taken over Hyrule Castle, at least in Link's memory. Zelda's missing, Impa's missing, the Kakiri Forest is overrun with monsters. You're told that Saria was last seen going to the Forest Temple, so you gotta rush over to the Sacred Meadow, hoping she's not dead yet. You have to navigate through the Lost Woods, which has some delightfully cheery music on the way. It was quite nice, actually. There's a moblin! You're an adult now, and the world is a lot darker. The Forest Temple is the first dungeon you play as adult Link, and it definitely shows in difficulty. The player's last attempt at facing off Ganondorf was almost hilariously bad. Link didn't even get a chance to fight, so to even for a second believe that we were about to fight him now is terrifying. This is also around the time I started suspecting that I was being watched. The Forest Temple is such a remote location, and it isn't really a place Ganondorf would typically think about up in his castle. Yet he knew Link would be there and sent a phantom copy of himself after Link. And it's clear from his monologue that he can see Link through some sort of means. After this fight, I was left with a sense of uneasiness throughout the rest of the temples. He knew I went to the Forest Temple, so I was clearly trying to awaken the sages. So why wasn't he trying to stop me? I didn't learn the answer until much later throughout the game. So yeah, Phantom Ganon. On its own, it isn't that scary, but because of its build-up and the sense of dread it can establish through a player for the rest of the game, I say it earns its number 5 spot on this list. You make your way to the top of the castle. The wind up here is so strong that you're surprised your cap is staying firmly on your head. Up ahead is the throne room. According to the princess, this is the place where she surrendered the kingdom to Zant. The invasion feels like such a long time ago. You walk into the throne room, only to see one of the statues of the goddesses removed from its head. Looking up to where the original sculptures were, you see her, the princess. Her soul still remains with Midna, but physically she seems unharmed. Looking over to the throne, you see a figure illuminated by the strikes of lightning outside. Even though you've never met him before, you know who this is. Ganondorf.
Welcome to my castle,
He says.
To defy the gods with such petty magic, only to be cast aside. How very pathetic. Your people had some skill, to be sure, but they lacked true power. The kind of absolute power that those chosen by the gods wield. He who wields such a power will make a suitable king for this world, don't you think? So try to deny me. You and your little friend.
Before you or Midna can stop him, Ganondorf possesses Zelda, causing her to throw Midna aside. You try to run after her, but a wall of shadow is cast, blocking your exit. You're trapped. From behind you, you hear Ganondorf, speaking through the princess. Both of you, faithless fools who dare to take up arms against the King of Light and Shadow. So you choose, and so you shall feel my wrath. And on goes the fight with Ganon's puppet, Zelda. Context: Twilight Princess was one of the earlier games I played in the Zelda series, so while I knew Ganondorf was more powerful than Zelda, heck, he's the wielder of the Triforce of Power, I always thought of her to be a considerable threat to him. I've seen him do things like immobilize her, put her in crystals, and banish her to other realms, but possession was a first. To see him take control of her so easily and watch him fling her around like a toy was shocking. For a while I was scared to even touch her, because despite the fact that he's controlling it, that's still Zelda's body. Thankfully, the player doesn't have to actually kill her. They just have to avoid the light triangles of death, avoid some sword attacks, and play everyone's favorite game of energy ball tennis, and basically keep Zelda busy long enough for Midna to wake up and get rid of Ganondorf herself. Zelda's returned to normal and everyone's happy until Ganon gets into his second phase. There's a gaping hole in the floor below you. You don't know where it leads, but you know you have to keep going. You have to save Impa. You jump and land on a drum of some kind. Before you have time to comprehend your surroundings, a severed hand slams down onto the drum. It's ginormous, and it's soon followed by a second hand, and the two start beating down on the drum in a rhythmic pattern. Looking up, you can see the figure that slowly started to reveal itself. It's a giant, strung upside down with its arms cut off, and a glowing red eye sprouting out from where its head head was severed. This is the thing that attacked you in Cheek in Kakariko Village, and now it's your job to take it down. And your battle with the Phantom Shadow Beast Bongo Bongo begins. Alright, mark this one off your bingo boards. You all knew Bongo Bongo would be on this list. To be real though, despite the fact that Bongo Bongo's design is creepy on its own, they literally designed it like a prisoner who had their hands cut off for thievery and then was later beheaded. And you know, the fact that it like frantically beats on its drums as it dies. But like many of the bosses on this list, the horror comes from what the boss implies for the rest of the story. In the game's release before Ocarina of Time, the Hyrulean royal family has been depicted as the people on the right side of history. People who want to do good and are always the victim of whatever bad is in the kingdom. The games want you to think of them as good people with the exception of that one prince from the second game. But this temple tells a different story, one that's filled with Hyrule's bloody history of greed and hatred. Both the Shadow Temple and the bottom of the well were torture and possibly experimentation chambers used by the Sheikah under the orders of the Hyrulean royal family. And once we see Bongo Bongo, we start to see just how far they went, and worry that they might have gone even farther. And it honestly makes me stop and wonder the lengths that this family has gone to remain the only rulers throughout all of Hyrule's history. And if that doesn't send a shiver down your spine, then I don't know what will. You stare at the hole in front of you. This is it, the end of the windfish's egg. You know what will happen if you keep going forward. But if you stay here, you wouldn't be living. You jump. Once you land, you hear an otherworldly voice throughout the room.
We are born of nightmares to take over this world. We make the windfish sleep endlessly. If the windfish doesn't wake up, this island will never disappear. We could have been the masters of this place, but you had to come here and disrupt our plans. You can never defeat us. Let's rumble.
You start to glow as a shadow emerges from you. This is the final nightmare. And the first phase of this fight isn't scary at all. It's just a little blob boy that Link sprinkles some magic power on, no big deal. But then the nightmare shifts to the second phase of this fight and...
Aghanim?
For those of you who don't know, Link to the Past was my first Zelda game. I would play it with my mom as a kid. And back then, I had never seen a story like Link to the Past. So all the major story beats came as a surprise to me. This man right here, this is the guy that kidnapped 7 innocent girls around the world, put them in crystals, killed the king of Hyrule, killed my freaking uncle and made me watch him die, banished me to the dark realm and left me for dead. This man, that one right there, you see him? He's freaking terrifying. I remember watching him banish Zelda as a child and thinking that she was going to die. For a villain who scared me so much as a kid to just appear out of nowhere actually left me in shock for a few seconds. Beating the nightmare when it takes Aghanim and Ganon's forms feels almost reminiscent to Link in a way, as we're both fighting our past enemies. So even though my audience might not find this fight particularly scary, for me it earns the number 2 spot on this list. Could you guess this one? You couldn't guess this one at all. I mean, it's just so far out there for me to pick this one. I mean, it's just so out of the blue. I don't think I need to write an introduction for this boss like I've been doing for the other ones. I think everyone knew that I was gonna put this fight somewhere on my list, both because of my name and the fact that Majora's Mask has a reputation for being one of the darkest Zelda games. You talk to the children inside the moon before this fight. The child of interest here is the one wearing Majora's Mask, and the conversation with it goes as follows. Everyone's gone away, haven't they? Will you play with me? Let's play good guys against bad guys. Are you ready? You're the bad guy, and when you're bad, you just run. That's fine, right? Well, shall we play? This is one of the few times we directly talk to Majora, and it's referencing the story told to us by Andrew's grandmother earlier in the game. And once we get into the fight, the first phase has Majora reveal its tentacles from behind its back and flying around the room, spinning in order to attack Link. Once Link has done enough damage though, Majora will summon the 4 boss masks to join the fight, making focusing on Majora alone next to impossible, and the player is required to pick off the other masks before returning your attention to the boss at hand. After enough damage is dealt to Majora, it transitions into the second phase of the fight, Majora's Incarnate. Majora's attacks become a lot less calculated now and more frantic and we'll see it do things like running around the room, crying, and we even hear its voice. The voice of a child, laughing, crying, and screaming. And then when the player does enough damage, the boss transforms into its third and final phase, Majora's Wrath. Majora's Wrath is the mask's complete descent into madness. It doesn't care about the Skull Kid. It doesn't care about the giants. It doesn't even care about the moon anymore. Majora is angry, and it's going to take up all those thousands of years of pent-up frustration on you. Majora grows 2 whips and quickly jumps from one side of the room to another, attacking Link with the whips, and at some points even picking Link up and throwing him across the room. This is a hard fight without the first 3D mask, but once you manage to window down its health bar, Majora disintegrates and you've won. I don't really know how to put into words why this fight is unnerving. Majora's Mask in general does such a good job of making the player feel this sinking negative feeling inside them. Heck, the entire game is about coming to terms with your own death. Just watching Majora's slow descent into madness just makes me uncomfortable. I don't really know how else to word it. It just feels wrong. But yeah, Majora, number 1 on this list. And yeah, that was my top 10 favorite scary Zelda bosses. Funnily enough, even though I like the bosses on the later half of the list better, I think I had more to say about the bosses I disliked more on this list. But these bosses are all great in my opinion. If you disagreed with one of the rankings on this video, that's fine. This is an opinion after all. And if you agreed with some of the rankings, tell me why. I'd love to hear your top 10 lists of scary Zelda bosses in the comments below. I'd like to apologize for the low audio quality. I'm having to pre-record a bunch of things right now, and I didn't have time to re-record the entire thing, so I apologize. Videos of higher quality will be coming soon, and happy spooky season everyone. I'm Mass Majora, and I'll see you guys later.